Good morning.
Morning. Morning.
Welcome to everybody who's here in the hall and here virtually or actually online. Is it going to snow this week? You think?
Somewhere.
Will there be a snow day? Will the kids get snow days? This might be the koan of the generation. Yeah. I think they have to. I think it's required. So this week I want to continue talking about the bodhisattva vow. And I've been emphasizing in the last two talks how when we hear the bodhisattva vow, which are beings are numberless, I vow to free them. That's the one you hear most often. It usually comes in a series of 4. So beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. And the Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it or sometimes become it. The framing of the bodhisattva vow sounds totally impossible. If we just focus on the first of those 4 lines of the vow, beings are numberless, I vow to free them, or I vow to become free with them, or I vow to awaken them or awaken with them. There's a lot of ways that we could play with the words, that we could shift the translation. But if we think about that, it just seems impossible, right? How could I, this small being, have such an effect on the multitude of beings? I remember when I was in school, and one of the things they would have us do is they would. I hated it, but I so appreciate that they had us do this, and now I can see the real beauty in it. They would have this little block of space. I'd give you like a little cardboard frame or something, and we had to go outside and just lay it down. We got to choose wherever we went, lay it down, and then we had to watch inside that frame for like a whole hour and write down everything that we saw inside that little frame. Have you ever done that? It's amazing. It's actually, you can spend a whole hour looking, and there's more and more and more and more and more and more and more there. It's filled with beings. Even to save all the beings in that little, 5-inch frame of cardboard frame, in a way would seem impossible. I've been emphasizing that in the first talk. I was emphasizing it because that impossibility is so important if we're going to work with the deep heart medicine that the Buddha is offering us. If we keep things in a very practical or graspable mindset, we can't work with the depths of our own heart, right? Because we just function with them rationally. I'll say, well, okay, there's these 10 people in my life I'm pretty close to. What could I do to free them? And then I will go about that project of trying to free those people, which they may not appreciate all that much. But my thinking will become narrow. That's just the way that it works. So in the first talk, I was emphasizing how this impossibility encourages us to encounter something that's not just on our normal way of looking at the world, and that comes to us through myth. It comes through us through ritual. And there are ways that we can enact the vow that something comes alive in us in a place that is deeper than our normal way of thinking about and navigating our life. So impossibility is really important in that frame. Last week I was emphasizing how the impossible is so important because that's how things become practical. Now that seems like a kind of oxymoron, or it seems like a contradiction. But things being impossible is how we will actually meet what's there, not our idea of what's there. And if we try to do something that seems doable, very practical, I was bringing up the example of building a building. that I was working on quite a few years ago, and that if you sink your teeth into something which seems as practical as that, you'll find it's just full of things you can't corral, you can't keep track of. And so the impossibility of the vow teaches us about the true intimacy of doing something practical. If we're gonna do real work in the world, that if our mind thinks it knows what it's doing, thinks that it has a grasp on what is present, then we start to just enact our own karmic cycles rather than to allow something else to come through. So practicality and intimacy really rely on impossibility. They rely on something that's beyond our view, beyond our grasp, beyond our understanding. Today, I titled the talk this morning, "Forever Means Right Now." Forever is a really tricky word, and I'm gonna avoid a philosophical discussion of forever. But the point in this is I wanted to talk about impossibility in relationship to time. When we think about, okay, what would it mean to free every single being in every realm of existence that we could conceive of? Well, if I have, 50 years or 60 years or 100 years, it just seems totally impossible. But maybe the impossibility that appears in this vow has to do with a life that is not bound by 50 years or 70 years or 100 years. Maybe there is something that is beyond the way that we think about time. We think about the limits of a lifetime. That's loosely what I'm referring to when I say forever here. But if we're going to relate with that thing that is beyond, if we're going to try to work through something that is as deep as the vow of the bodhisattva, that we can't rely on some abstraction in time. Like, given enough time, I would be able to do this. Right? That's an abstraction. But that foreverness, that impossibility of the expanse of time, points us to what is immediate, what is completely present in our life at this time, right now. And that the foreverness and the nowness, they need each other. If you just focus on one side or the other, then it's hard to really see things through. Now, when we talk about the vow, the impossibility of the vow in relationship to the practical or the intimate, you can see how that relates to interdependence. Everything is interdependent. We study that all the time in the Dharma. So if you pick out anything, any person, any object, any being, to behold that, the glass is the thing that we point to often in Dharma talks because there's usually a glass of water here. Right? And so we say, to know this glass is to know the whole universe. Everything in all of the universe is involved in this glass being here. We can follow it out in a simple way. We say, well, the glass is made of something. It's made of, what is it? Melted silicon? Silicon? Silica. Yeah, that makes the glass. And then you could say, well, it had to get formed. What did it get formed by? Who thought to form it that way? Who birthed the person who thought to form it that way? Who fed the person who birthed the person who thought to form it this way? Where'd the silica come from? So you can follow it out, right? And you can see in a very practical sense that for this glass to be here is a massive interconnection of physical, mental, spiritual networks. So normally we think about that kind of interdependence through space. And when we think about it through space, and we think about the vow to save all beings, there's a reference there to the interdependence through all of space. To save even one being would require the saving of all beings, because all beings are completely reliant on each other. So you can't just say, well, I'll save this 10 because that seems practical. Right? We see that in our society today. Try to do well for 10 people, try to make their life better, try to be just. And what do you leave out? You automatically will start leaving something out. You will focus on the qualities of those 10 beings, and it will leave some other beings out that don't have those qualities. Okay? Doesn't mean you shouldn't do that work. But it means if you think, oh, I'm really doing it because I'm saving these 10 people, and you forget about all the people who aren't those 10 people, you haven't carried out the vow, right? The vow is to save all beings. So we see that in space. We can see how that functions, how interdependence functions. But what I'd like to bring up today is that that same kind of interdependence doesn't only happen in space, but it also is laid out in time. Now, it's easier for us to think about space than to think about time, even though a few of the things I just said might be a little cognitively challenging, like hard to grasp. They're not supposed to be graspable. That's kind of the point, right? But in space, at least we can look and we can see, like, well, I have some sense what space is. Like, I can look in 3 directions, 4, 8, however many we call it. But I can look around. Like, I have a sense I know what space is. But when it comes to time, it seems like time just goes one direction. Right? I'm just now, and then just now, and then just now, and then just now. The little clock I have here used to say 10:56, now it says 11:02. Right? And it just goes forward. It doesn't tend to go backwards in my experience. Right? It doesn't tend to. So the way that we relate with time becomes a little bit more difficult because it tends to move in one direction, and then we experience loss. And in time we experience loss, which is irreversible, at least in the way that we experience the world. Right? So we can't just go back over and pick the thing up like we can in space. If we drop something over there, we go and pick it up. In time, when something gets dropped, it's gone. But I would like to make the point that vow, while it's very important for us to think of it in terms of space, think of the wholeness of all beings, of all of that interdependence through space, we also have to deeply engage the conundrum of time, the conundrum of what it means to save all beings throughout time, not only throughout space, because it will take all of time. It will take the wholeness of time to save all beings. This is what the impossibility of the vow invites us into. Now, to get a little more concrete, part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is because in a week is my wife Azusa and I's anniversary, and it's our 30th anniversary. You can applaud. I can brag a little bit. And I want to talk about marriage and vow a little bit. I want to be careful not to hold this up as the way that people should live, as the only way, or even as a good way. All I can say is that it has been Azusa and Mai's way, and I'm very thankful for a life of marriage. And I also, I really hesitated about whether I wanted to talk about it or not, because I know for so many people, the vow of marriage ends in some kind of separation at some point. Well, actually, for everyone, it ends in a separation at some point. But I don't hold this up as being the ideal. There was a time in my life where I did, and that may be why I'm married for 30 years. I read a study a number of years ago. It was very interesting. They tried to figure out what leads to people staying married. You know the number one factor in people staying married is? Like very clearly, the number one. This is the thing that they can say. This is the number one factor, more than anything. If the couple believes in marriage or not. Really. That's, if people are like, marriage is an institution, we're going to get more, I believe in it. I believe that it's the thing. That's the number one thing. Now that's kind of twisted in a whole bunch of ways. And coming from my own, I come from a family where my parents they met in high school and have been married now for 58 years. And I think a wonderful partnership. And sometimes it works that way. Okay. Other people in my family, my grandparents and things, I think like, wow, they really shouldn't have stayed married. So I'm not trying to present too much of an idealistic vision here, but there's something within the vow of marriage which I think can teach us about this issue of time in the vow and impossibility. Because those of you who have entered into a vow of marriage, you know there's some impossibility involved there. Now, one of the things that is, I think, let me say, surprising when we start dealing seriously with time is finding out how concrete it is. When you make a concrete vow to build a life with another person and to share that life, that isn't something that you can do in the abstract. You can't say, well, let's be married, and you do all your stuff and I'll do all my stuff, and we'll just be in our own houses and we'll have our own bank accounts and we'll just do everything on our own, but we'll say we're married, right? I mean, if you wanted to get some tax benefits or something, maybe you would do that, but we wouldn't really call that a marriage vow, right? When you say, I want to build a life together, you're saying, I want to build a way for us to live together and to share the burdens and the joys of a life. To say that I'm going to do that without end immediately throws you on the practical questions of life. Where are we going to live? What are we going to eat for dinner tonight? Not what am I going to eat for dinner tonight, or where am I going to live, but where are we going to do that? And you start to face real questions immediately about how it is that you're going to get along together in this cooperative way. And there's a real deep practice in that. There's a real work that's there. I've had many times in my life where people say, "Oh, you're so lucky. You have such a wonderful marriage." And the first thing I always say is, "Yes, I am very, very lucky. Not only because of the amazing person who is my soulmate, but also because of the family I grew up in, the family she grew up in, the resources we've had, all kinds of the people around us. We've had so much support to make all of that work." So I say, yes, I'm very lucky. And then under my breath, at least, sometimes directly, I say, yeah, and a lot of work. Okay? So this is a quality of vow. I'm talking about through marriage because this is something that a part of my life that has been so important. But that's how vow is. If you feel like, oh yeah, I made this vow and then everything's just been like smooth, check out what your vow is. It's probably fairly self-indulgent. Like if you vowed to enjoy skateboarding every day for your life, I mean, even that you would struggle, right? You would fall down, you would skin your knee, something would happen, right? So the work that is necessary to make something valuable and enduring possible, things come to us way too easy now. I mean, actually, things don't come to us. Our ideas of things, our images of things, they're just fleeting, through the screen of our mind and the screen of our televisions and our phones and gossip and loose talk, But enduring revolutionary living takes hard work, and you got to apply yourself moment after moment after moment. It's not like I put a little in every morning for 30 minutes. I did my exercises every morning for 30 minutes. I lost some weight. I got in shape. It's like no, it's all the time. It's the wholeness of time, which is so strict when it comes to this kind of a vow. is requiring you to align everything with it. Now that's true of marriage, that's true of all kinds of vows. One thing that I've learned about time, one thing I've learned through time in relationship to vow, through years of living in the vow of marriage, is sticking with it. So there's effort, there's like really trying as hard as you can to make something work and not knowing whether it will work or not, that kind of effort. And then there's sticking with it. There's continuity, there's patience, there's coming back to the table again and again and again and again. Right? There's presence in sticking with it. Now, I mean presence in the sense of like the presence of your awareness, right? To be present for something. You have to do that, whereas marriage won't work. You can't really build a life together if you're not present to each other. Right? But it also is literal. Presence is not just a state of mind. Presence is your being, right? To be present, to show up in whatever way you can. I mean, we're all experiencing the difficulty of that now under COVID. What does it mean to show up? You know, we're here. Some of us are sitting in the hall. Some people are sitting in their home but are present through the technology that we're able to use. So we're all challenged by that right now. What does it mean to be present? Right? So I'm not talking that presence always looks the same way, but this is so necessary. And it's necessary not just in a spatial relationship with things, like how do I pay attention to something, but just being present, even if you're fairly oblivious, right, has real meaning. How do you put yourself into the thing that you care about? How are you present with all beings? How are you willing to be here, not just hold yourself apart, right? So the kind of no escape quality of the vow, you know, in the case of marriage, to death do we part is the cliche thing. Right? It is necessary for this deep reformation of our inner heart, to stick with it, to stick with living beings, to make a life together with living beings. This is what a bodhisattva does. A bodhisattva says, I will make a life together with all beings. Right? And there's no end to that until everybody is saved. Now, a second quality that comes from this kind of a vow is in relationship to time, sticking with it, sticking continuous through time. Another is not waiting. The expanse of the vow in time takes away the possibility to escape. Not just in space, we have all beings, right? But to do that is an infinite amount of time. And if we're really talking about time which has no end, the wholeness of time, you can't put anything off. It's still going to be there. Where are you going to put it off to? Right? It's just going to be somewhere else in time, which you will also be experiencing, which will also be part of the vow to save all beings. I once heard a story about a Chinese monk who had moved to the United States, and he had been abbot of a big temple in China. He moved here, and he just had a little cabin, and the person who was writing this was a college student who lived in the town where this monk's cabin was, and he and some of his friends got to know him a little bit. And I said one time that they were over at his house, he had made dinner for them, and they were eating, and he had all these weird conglomeration of utensils, like plastic forks and all this kind of random stuff that they were eating with. And the author said that he was horrified because as he was eating the food, he broke the fork that he had. But it was just a plastic fork, right? So he's like, okay, well, I'll throw the fork away. And he was looking for a place to throw it away, and he realized there was no garbage can. There was no place to put garbage in the house. There was no receptacle for something which was now considered outside of, right? Where could you throw it away? Where could it go that would be outside? This same conundrum exists in time. We're going to put something off till later. We're going to take care of the healthcare needs of the general populace. Well, we'll do that later. No, there's no later. Later is right now. We learn that when we dedicate ourselves to the fullness of something. We say that if I'm going to work with it, I have to work with it now. Now, it doesn't mean there's never timing, like politics, right? It took timing for Obama and his administration to be able to get through some kind of legislation around healthcare, right? So I'm not saying that there is no such thing as timing, but what I'm saying is you've got to get your heart right with it in the immediate sense. You have to respond to difficulties right away. And you have to cultivate joy right away. It's a death nail in trying to live together when you stop doing that. You say, oh, I'll do that later. Oh, put the joy off till tomorrow, right? Something doesn't seem quite right? Oh, maybe it'll just go away. And this is where all of the ways that we don't live out the vow start to creep into our being and sow seeds of a kind of undermining of our deep intention. Sometimes I really hate that. Like if Ozza and I are in a little bit of a tiff about something, I'm just like, could I just go to bed? Could I just go to the temple and not worry about this right now? And the answer is no. I can't. It doesn't mean that sometimes I don't go, but I can't go and not worry about it. It's there. The thorn of the discord is present. If I'm serious about saving all beings, I have to be willing to take that thorn. You see what I'm saying there? Not to put it off in time, to say, oh, we'll deal with that thorn later, but to feel the pain of that thorn, even though I can't do anything about it right in the moment. This is actually what we sign up for. Another thing we learn in a vow that is anchored in time is that we had better live through what is liberating, because the effect is cumulative and fast. When you make the choice to live through the thing which is just kind of shutting stuff down or just fulfilling your kind of gross desires, that just compounds very, very, very quickly. And you find yourself in a pile of that world. You find yourself in that world and very hard to get out of. When you dedicate yourself to something that lays out in time, you can see the cumulative effects much more easily than when you haven't bound yourself to something in that way. And so you have to get sharper and sharper and sharper in making the right choice. In fact, the vow allows you to make the choice for liberation because it gives you that feedback. When you haven't bound yourself to something, that feedback is very hard to hear. Right? So in a marriage, you're binding yourselves together in cooperation. If you're making these choices that are harmful to the other person or doesn't support their growth or many different things, you begin to feel that, right? And it becomes easier and easier to choose the thing which is liberating for both of you. And it can be very subtle, very subtle. I was thinking about this in relationship to eating, which is a big topic at my house, and activity, which was really, that was something I had to really learn when Ozza and I were married. I came from a household where people like to eat. I mean, people like to eat, right? Basically, most people like to eat. Some people don't. But we were hearty eaters, right? But it's like, make dinner, sit down, eat dinner. Oh, good. All right. Clean up. Now go do something else. Dinner was kind of a 20-minute affair. My wife's family, I swear, every evening, at least 3 hours. That's what dinner is. You know, starts around 6. There's some little treats that we would have with her father would drink sake. My wife's Japanese, would drink sake and have some little things you have with your sake. And so, you know, the kids would be nibbling on those, and the TV's usually on, and people kind of talking about things. It's actually really quite fun. I came to quite enjoy it. It drove me crazy when we were first married and we were living with her parents, and it was like I wanted to eat and then go study, or eat and then go do something. You know, like that was my pattern, and there it was just unfolded throughout the evening. And then they'd think I was mad or something because I'd go to the other room and read a book or something, you know. And, anyway, I'm kind of getting off track here. But eating, big deal at my house, right? And this is something I really love about Azusa. As much as she loves food, and she loves eating, and she loves thinking about how to prepare wonderful food, and as much as she loves to do that for herself, like when I'm gone, she's by herself, she just cooks all these wonderful meals and eats them by herself. When she's gone, I just eat like whatever's in the refrigerator. As much as she's like that, she's always watching whoever she's eating with to see how they're enjoying the food. Like that's her number one like vision in the situation. It's not just about eating good food, it's about caring for each other. And for her, food is a core vehicle for how it is that we care for each other. So I'm bringing that up is in this work of looking for liberation or living through what is liberating. If she was just really into good food, it would have been a problem. If that was the value, good food at any expense, right? At any cost. That's our value. Eat good food. It all becomes about the food, not about the caring. And now you're in trouble. It's very subtle. And you could think like, well, of course I'm caring. I'm trying to get good food for you. But that doesn't work that way. Actually, the caring has to be there. So we get that when we pay attention through this kind of commitment that involves the wholeness of time. That if we don't care for a person now, when will we care for them? And there is something in this which is, in all of these, the three that I'm presenting today, sticking with it, not waiting, living through what is liberating, they all have a way of deeply challenging cyclical existence, which in Buddhism is called samsara, and it is the world of suffering. It's the world where we never feel at ease. We never feel stable, right? Because things are always in these unstable cycles. The bodhisattva's vow is to liberate from that cyclical existence. Then taking seriously our commitment to something through time is a direct medicine for the heart, which is always churning that wheel of suffering. So my point here is not that you should all go out and get married. Not at all. In fact, Azza used to get so mad at her friends when they would. We got married very early. I was 20 and she was 21, And her friends would say, oh, I want to get married. And she would get so mad at them. She says, no, you don't want to get married. And they would say, oh, but you seem pretty happy. And she's like, that's not what it's about. It's not about whether I'm happy. It's about, if you want to get married, you're setting yourself up for a big mistake. So that's not my point at all in talking about this today. But my point is, marriage is something we're all familiar with in some way. We know what it looks like. And hopefully we've seen it work well, right? It often will not work well. And oftentimes it will have to dissolve. And that's not my point in talking today either. My point is you should hook yourself to something that has the same kind of risk that marriage has. It has the same kind of risk to invest in a way where you don't know what's going to come out the other side. You have to have a faith in something to keep going day after day, to encounter other beings. Right? That is what the bodhisattva vow is pointing us to. If we just say the words, that's pretty good. It does something for us. And then we'll start asking the question, what does it mean to really live that way? Right? What does it really mean to live with that as the heart? Right? It's not an abstract question. Probably have time for one or two questions, or comments, or exclamations.
Early on, you talked about if you focus just on 10 people,
Mm-hmm.
what about all the others?
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
Yeah. So you focus on the 10 people, realizing that there is everybody else too. The mistake in our choosing is that we have the habit of choosing and forgetting rather than choosing with an open hand. So my advice would not be to stop trying to help anybody. We have to help concrete beings, including ourselves. But as we do that, can we do it without creating a shell around those beings as the completeness of what it means to carry out the vow? Sometimes that's really practical, like Azza and I were blessed with 3 daughters, and so there's all kinds of things I did for my daughters that I have never done for any other person or child. So I had to put my focus into them. They're my responsibility in a way that I couldn't for other children. So I'm choosing them, but in choosing them, am I leaving behind those other children? That should be my constant question. How can my care for them be a gateway to my caring for all children? As opposed to how is my caring for them the limits of my caring for children? And that's it's not an easy question. And we do end up spending resources in some places and not other places. And that's part of our limited nature. But the more we pay attention to that, the more we can find ways through into a fuller expression of our caring, not just how it applies to that group. That's one thing. I was a public educator for a long time, and that's one thing I really loved about public education, was even there were so many things about it that drove me nuts. There was a feeling like, we have a country in which we have created a legal structure that says every single person, that's not always carried out well, but every single person has a right to this kind of care in being educated in a full way. We at least have the ideal, So that stretched me to see past my care for my own children to care for all children. Anything else pressing?
Richard?
Hi. Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to navigating what is sticking out and where we know is a dead end, and that we need to keep our vow, but perhaps go about it some other way.
Yeah. I think I am not a good expert in that. For me, the core vows that have guided my life, for the most part, I haven't had to do that. I would say that my work as a school teacher, which was deeply facet of vow, it wasn't like it wasn't working and I needed to stop. It was more like I had another thing I had to do, and it was time to put it away. As I work with people, I know that is one of the deepest conundrums of vow. That the vow itself, if we could see down to the depths of it, is about sticking with something that is not a grasping onto the circumstance. So if our marriage vow, for example, is just hold it together under any cost, which was really a lot of that in my family, in my Catholic side of my family particularly. It just wasn't an option, right? Like, there's no such thing as divorce. And so much suffering coming from that, not healthy. But the reason for that impossibility of divorce, or the deeper part of that vow, is that we don't just cling to the form of how it is that we are together, building our life together, but how do we find that real heart of love, which in Buddhism we would call the heart of liberation, the heart of compassion, the heart of wisdom. That's what we're aiming for. So when I'm working with people who are in the middle of that real difficult process of discerning, what I point them to, and I think is most important, is how do you come through the process with the same commitment, right, for the best outcome for your partner, right? Not just we're splitting up, right? But how is the absolutely best outcome for them part of your motivation? Because that's what your vow was. Your vow was not just like, how do we hold this together? Your vow was, how do we liberate each other? So that's where I point people to pay attention to. And I think it's reliable.